Welcome to the latest episode of the Blazing Musket podcast. We are joined this week by Josh Nye, who covers Revolution II for us here at the Blazing Musket. He's here to review the relatively successful season that just wrapped up last week for the Revs II team that had a much improved 2025 over the 2024 season, which, of course, as we all know, is something that cannot be said by the first team. They had back-to-back poor seasons and 3 out of the last 4. So things are looking a little bit better for Revs II. And of course, you know, the hope is that if there's good things going on with the second team, that will lead to some of these guys having success with the first team. So Josh is here to kind of run through everything that transpired and what maybe we can look forward to in the future. So Josh, you know, you're more dedicated than anyone on this planet to covering the New England Revolution II. How was the, you know, is it better to cover a team that isn't losing every single week?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. Such an honor to be here. But yeah, kind of like you said, a lot better this year. Got better, more than 4 wins, which is always a positive note after last year. But just happy to be here and to recap and shed a little bit more light on Revs II.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, just quickly on 2024. I mean, you know, how bad was that season? I mean, 4 wins for sure doesn't sound like that many. But for people that don't know, MLS Next Pro has kind of a weird thing where if the game ends in a tie, it goes into a shootout. So can you just kind of explain quickly like how that kind of works? And did the Revs not have shootout success either? And it was 2024 just kind of a whole waste.
Well, one thing I will say is, again, I'll look up the numbers real quick. Even though they did, have 18 losses on the year, even when they got to that shootout, I think out the top of my head, it was pretty, well played by them. They were able to sneak out points here and there, but, at the end of the day, you kind of want to turn those into wins.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you could, in a 4-win season, I'm sure there's lots of things that you could point to. But I mean, was there one thing in particular last year that really held the team back? Was it, they couldn't score goals, they couldn't defend, set pieces, or maybe just getting off to good starts and then fading? Or was there just one thing that you just kind of kept saying to yourself, it's this once again?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest issues that faced them last year was kind of not really having a complete squad throughout the whole year, especially like Richard Williams talked about it. They had a bunch of injuries throughout the year, especially like a big one was Victor Souza, who was out for 12 games in the middle of the year, which kind of, it was been one of their bigger defensive presences throughout this time there. So obviously not having him for 12 games hurt. There's also Gio Calderon, who missed the final 8 games due to a couple injuries. So obviously then too, there's also, guys like Alex Moniz, Ultra Escobar, JD Gunn, who were kind of out throughout kind of the year with international duty. So it's kind of like, it felt like every week there was always like one piece missing throughout the whole conglomeration, which kind of really hurt their chemistry throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's at various points during last season as well where the Revs had a lot of injuries as well. So then you were seeing, you were seeing like Paniutu, seeing some of the other guys get pulled up. And obviously, it's a good opportunity for them, but then it, kind of disrupts what's going on with the second team. Now this year, 2025, just let us know, where do they finish up in the standings, and how did their season ultimately come to an end?
Well, yeah, so first off, they had a much improved year this year. They ended the year in 3rd in the East, which is a whole lot better. I think it's 11 spots up from their 14th place last year. Ended the year with 14 victories, which is a whole 10 more than they did last year. Ended up with 7 losses and 7 ties with 5 shootout wins in between. So obviously a lot better. They only missed out on the top spot by 4 points, which is, again, after last year, is a whole much better improvement. And then, unfortunately, I think we'll probably get into it a little bit more later. I think kind of the wheels fell off towards the end of the year in terms of scoring, in terms of defense. And unfortunately, that bit them in the quarterfinal round where they lost to Chicago and had a pretty good season, ended a lot shorter than I think a lot of people wanted.
Yeah, especially where they, they had a home playoff game, right? So not only just getting themselves in there, but similar to MLS, a 3rd place finish gets you a game at home, and unfortunately they weren't able to, they weren't able to take advantage of that. What now? As someone that follows Revs II really closely, do you like the shootout aspect? Because I mean, I think I only got to one game this year, but I got to three or four last year, and I get it, right? Like it's soccer. If a game ends in a tie, it's it's supposed to be okay, and okay, no problem. That's how the whole world does it. Totally understand that. But at the same time, immediately going into a shootout, like it kind of adds a little bit of a climax to the game that otherwise just kind of peters out in a draw. But I mean, what do you think? Do you enjoy that aspect of it, or would you rather they just did away with it?
Personally, it's a little bit weird to kind of see in that kind of format, but also if you think about it too, I think it could be very beneficial to some of these guys. Taking penalties is like very stressful, especially on these like younger prospects. And giving them an opportunity to kind of, step up, whether it be the goalkeepers or whether it be the shooters themselves, to kind of get used to that. So when they do make that jump to whether it be up to their MLS team or up to another league, they're kind of a lot more comfortable from the spot or from the goal line to kind of, just do their thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, we saw shootouts. You'll probably see quite a few more before this game, before this episode comes out. But last night you had Chicago and Philadelphia went into a shootout, and that's obviously some of these guys they've taken two penalties or three penalties the whole season. Some of them haven't taken any. So for sure, I think it's an interesting idea, and like I said, it makes it kind of fun at the end of the game, and for the 100 or so people that are there, it gives you a reason to stick around. So 2025 season, like you said, miles better than 2024. High finish in the league, a bunch of wins, a really strong season. So who are the players that had the most impact, in driving the team to that level of success?
Well, obviously, I think the first and biggest one, in my opinion, has to be Marcos Diaz. Consistent presence for Revs II since he arrived here, ending the year with 10 goals and an MLS Next Pro record 13 assists and 29 appearances. Kind of was that deciding factor for Revs II to either, for him slotting the ball home or whether it be dishing it out. And, it kind of resulted in, him winning the Next Pro Player of the Year. Kind of just been consistent presence. Also, another one, too, is Liam Butts. He, again, when he's healthy and when he's on the field, he's really productive for New England. Ending the year with 13 goals, which is the most in a single season for Revs II. And also now that 13 increased into 18, which is now the second most in club history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that those Butts in particular season, whenever, like you said, whenever he is able to stay healthy, he gets himself on a good run of form, which unfortunately that seems to be a theme for strikers with the first team as well. Campani got on a couple of runs this year, and then sure enough, he gets injured. Veroni, of course, as we all affectionately remember, had similar issues. He'd have a good run of goal scoring and then either get hurt or get himself sent off and then get hurt. Yeah, I know. Looking at the team, I think people are probably more interested in the younger players on the team. Like, it's all fine and good for some of these guys that are 22, 23, maybe 24 years old, which certainly is not old in like time on earth, but it is a little old as far as a prospect. So are there any players, any younger players, say maybe under 21, maybe still teenagers, that showed themselves as really bright prospects for the future?
Yeah, well, honestly, I feel bad for saying this, but someone like a Malcolm Fry, who I think really hasn't gotten a fair shot with the first team throughout his tenure here. He kind of was able to have a rough 2025 at the beginning of the year with an injury, but he's able to come in and have a really good season with Revs II, ending with 5 goals and 6 assists and 17 appearances. Honestly, I think he's someone that should obviously be getting a good look with whoever comes in for the next head coaching gig.
How old is Fry now?
I have to double check. I want to say 20 or 21, which feels weird to say. On paper, it feels like he's been here for a while, but again, like I said, I don't think he's really gotten a fair shot with the first team.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then, are there any other guys? We know that we saw Eric Klein a little bit here and there with the first team, Alan Oyerwath as well. How did they look like maybe they need a little bit more time below MLS level, but how do they look with Revs II?
Yeah, they look fine, and kind of almost kind of what you hinted to. I think some of those type of players, I think they need another avenue outside of Revs II because it's a little bit beyond where their skill set is now. But I think Eric Klein and Alan Oyerworth could possibly benefit from a good loan to USL.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I
yeah.
think that there does come a time where maybe they've proven themselves with Revs II, and then maybe like that kind of like a finishing year where they go out on loan and then come
Mhm.
back, and they're ready to play for the first team. How much time did Klein and Oyawath, get on the field together, and did you see anything there in terms of, I think a lot of people would hope that if they both find themselves, on the first team at the same time, both being, central midfielders, did you see any kind of chemistry developing between the two of them, or is that something that maybe needs a little bit more time as well?
I think Oyawarth definitely needs a little bit more chemistry, considering his situation. He's 18 years old. He's flown halfway across the world in a whole new culture, whole new country. I think he just needs a little bit more time to, kind of get used to everything, how everything goes here on and off the field. But I feel like Klein, he was a little bit of a strange case because he spent a lot of his time with the first team, but not actively playing in terms of games, featured on the bench a lot as unused sub. Come down the Revs II every once in a while and get some minutes. But again, I think a loan type move like that could really benefit and help boost those guys' potential.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that like Malcolm Fry's another one too? That he has a first team contract, but really, I mean, he didn't. I don't think he got to look in at all at any point this season. With the first team. I mean, do you think that does that seem like a challenging situation for them to be like, okay, they're with the first team, and then they go and play with Revs II, and like kind of bouncing back and forth. I mean, do you think that's something that maybe some of these guys struggle with a little bit?
Most definitely, especially like when you're that young, you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you kind of want to have that singular outlet of where you can kind of like go week by week and improve your skills. But then it's definitely going to be tough for them to go against a lot older competition and then kind of just either be relegated to either the bench on the first team or kind of just playing with, a lot different kind of style of play in MLS Next Pro on the weekend.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And it can be kind of tricky too. If the Revs play on Saturday night, they might be hoping to get minutes on Saturday. Those minutes don't come to pass, and then they find themselves playing with the second team on Sunday and that sort of thing. Were there any players in particular that you felt, however old they are, just grew as the season went on? That maybe
Oh,
the player that they were at the end of the year was maybe kind of surprising from how they started off.
yeah, one of the bigger names on that kind of end is Cristiano Oliveira, young 16 to now 17-year-old. Kind of came into the year not really exactly knowing what position they would play him at, but eventually Richard Williams and it seems like the organization staff kind of decided that central defensive midfield would probably be his best option, where he got a good extended run of games towards the end of the year. Obviously, end of the year with 5 goals and 2 assists over 25 appearances. A really solid year for him and kind of proving his case of why he could be one of the next players to advance up the pipeline.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, how much how much these guys playing in the same position, week in and week out. Does Richie kind of change it up a little bit? Like I'm always curious as to like, are they already saying, like an Oliveira, 16, 17 years old, already okay? Well, this is where we think your settled position is, or do these guys kind of get some opportunities to move around a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. They definitely get opportunities to move around. Example like Eric Klein last year, he was used primarily in the central midfield, but sometimes he dropped back to center back or even right back. Kind of just giving them a chance to really see what else they can do at other positions on the field before they really nail something down.
Yeah, it's I actually remember that. I forgot about that Klein last year. Yeah, I seen it kind of be popping up all over the place. Do you think Oliveira, does he profile to you as like a defensive mid, or do you think I don't, I can't keep up with the terminology anymore, but more of like a more of a, he said he scored 5 goals, so you think he's maybe more of like a box to box type of midfield player? Like, I mean, ultimately, where do you think he kind of ends up being?
I think, he could work at central defensive midfield. I think he just probably needs to put on a little bit more weight, but again, he's 17 years old, plenty of time to develop into, that more typical center defensive midfield role. But again, I think obviously, like I said, the 5 goals, 2 assists, box to box seems like that could really be his bread and butter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of like this situation. Think back to like Noel Buck. Sometimes playing out in the right wing, sometimes playing as like a deeper center mid, sometimes playing a little bit more advanced, and it's kind of like, well, where is this all gonna where is this all going to sort itself out when they're, not grown up at 2021, but once they, hopefully are moving on onto the first team. And look, talk about this as well. Richie was there in 2024. He was there again in 2025. But his time with the organization preceded Caleb Porter's. So I always kind of wondering, like, how close, does like the style of play and the formation of Revs II, match what the Revs were doing. Like, so, like, for example, like when the Revs started off the season 2 years in a row playing a 4-2-3-1, and then it gets abandoned when things don't go very well, and they switch to a back three. Now, is it, did that like filter down to Revs II, where all of a sudden Richie comes in, he's like, well, hey, first team's playing a back three, we've got to start playing a back three now, or is it more kind of doing his own thing?
Again, he's doing his own thing, which is kind of surprising to see. We talk about, the 4-2-3-1 and then going back to the 3-5-2. Revs 2 utilized a 4-4-3 a lot of the time this year. Initially, too, kind of, you look at the first team, it's a lot more slower build up. They utilize the center of the field a lot more, utilizing it with keel, kind of outlet passes to the side and that type of stuff. But with Revs 2, it's a lot more faster pace. They utilize a lot of long balls up the sides, whether it be from like Jabort Diarbian, Demario McIntosh, Malcolm Fry. And then they kind of work the ball in from there, from either the left or the right flank, which is something we really don't see from the first team.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of the interesting thing, too. I think some people will make the argument that you want to have some variety with the second team so that they're ready for different situations when they get to the first team. But I would imagine that there are probably some MLS Next Pro teams that it's, I think when I saw Columbus Crew 2 play, it seemed like the style was not as good, obviously, but it's somewhat of an imitation of what the first team was doing. You mentioned McIntosh. Now McIntosh, I thought maybe the plan for him was going to be to ease him into the first team this season, which is a bit much because he's not even 18 yet. But McIntosh in particular was someone that I thought for sure at some point we would see him with the first team this year. That didn't really come to pass. How do you think his season went? Because at least for me, my expectations were pretty high, having seen him play a couple times in 2024.
Yeah, so Demario is a different one. I think a lot of his issue too is the fact that the addition of Eli Feingold to that mix, it was always going to be kind of a hard, kind of battle with Brandon Bye there initially, but now that you're going against Bye and Feingold, they're kind of just the odd man out for him. But, I think he was able to kind of, take it on the chin, kind of just, put in the work down with Revs too. He had made a ton of appearances at right back and just kind of, use the year to kind of just continue growing and developing.
And talking about players that maybe need to go out on loan. Do you think that he's at that point where, look, if they're, a lot of people think that Brandon Bye is going to move on, but Feingold obviously then would most likely be cemented in as the starting right back. So what do you think would be best for him? Do you think he would be best suited with kind of an in-between year where he's getting some minutes with the first team but is still with Revs 2, or do you think he needs to find himself trying to play week in and week out in the USL?
I honestly think a loan move could probably be the better option because, especially if Eli Feingold locks on that right back spot, you really don't know how much time Demario is going to get at that position. Plus, again, I don't know if having another year of kind of him floating in between the first and second team is going to be the greatest. I think it loan to either a lower level USL club that can kind of give him consistent minutes throughout the year would be best for him.
Yeah, and that's I think again you're talking about Fry. I'd imagine that Fry probably wanted to get 2,000, 2,500 minutes. Somehow one way or another. This season instead of just kind of floating between the two teams. So what? And again, talking about this, the playing style and all this stuff. Let's assume that Richie is back for 2026. When the new coach, comes in. Do you think? What do you think? Do you think in the long run they would be better off trying to say, okay, we want this guy to be kind of telling Richie, look, I'd like to see you play in this style, in this formation, or do you think these guys benefit from, again, kind of doing things a little differently?
Honestly, I think kind of you talk about the Crew 2. Crew 2 has been a solid MLS organization over the year, and I think part of that is too is because they're able to bring up some of these guys from Crew 2 who have a really good impact. And I think part of that is because Crew 2 plays very similar to the first team. So having that kind of synergy between both organizations is just going to help everyone in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think when some of these guys kind of move up, there's obviously going to be an adjustment period that maybe could be lessened a little bit if the style is a little bit more similar. Well, look, I mean, they had a great season, right? So they came in third place. I don't know that Columbus Crew 2 had all that much of a successful season. So do you think that's kind of because you've actually talked to Richie about this many times in the last couple of years? Like, what is the balance supposed to be here? Are they trying to develop by winning, or are they just trying to develop by getting guys minutes? And 'cause it seems like it could really kind of go either way.
Yeah, Richie has kind of pointed out that it is kind of like the development through experience method, kind of getting these young players out there on the field, letting them experiment in different ways on the field, and just kind of hoping that those wins and those losses can kind of help mellow all those guys out and kind of develop them better prospects.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, learning how to win is part of development, as well. But I think Richie was a little bit more on the developmental side, when they're having a rough season in 2024.
Yeah.
All right.
Results don't matter.
Right, yeah, right. Until they do, right? Yeah, exactly.
Until they do, yep.
Yeah. But no, I think, look, I mean, again, you want these guys to get used to winning, right? You want them to know what winning feels like. You don't want them to be preconditioned to, well, every time we show up at Gillette, we lose.
Yeah.
All right. Now, is there anyone that you okay, for better or for worse, anyone that like from this team that needs to they need to move on. They need to not be back with Revs II next year. Either because of their age, where look, you're 23, you're 24. It's probably not going to happen with the first team. You're a good player, but you've got to go and you know what? Go see what USL League One is about. Go play in front of people. Or is there anyone that their performance that you're hoping? Look, this guy had a strong enough season where I don't want to see him back here next year because I want to see him with the first team.
So obviously, biggest one has to be Marcos Diaz. For some reason, he just hasn't been able to get that first team contract over the last couple off seasons. Hopefully, that's the case this off season, but we'll see if he really can't get that off season contract. I mean, I think it's time that he explores his options elsewhere because it seems like New England just isn't going to be the landing spot for him, whether that be USL 2 or USL Championship or elsewhere throughout the world. I think he could definitely be a starter somewhere for a big first team.
Yeah, I mean, how long has he been with Revs II? This is like
2022. So yeah, this is his fourth year.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. It's like, I mean, look, he's done really well. I think we interviewed him, not me, somebody for Blazing Musket interviewed him earlier in the year, and he said he loves New England, and that's great. It's great that you love it here, but there are 3 other professional teams in New England that if the Revs don't want to give you a chance. But is there anybody else? Is there anyone else that you think, again, either look, you've been here, it just hasn't quite happened, do yourself a favor and move on and then open up a spot for somebody younger, or again, is there anyone else that you think for sure needs to just make their way up to the first team?
One that I wouldn't really want to see because I think he's a phenomenal goalkeeper is JD Gunn. He's getting up there in age. I think he's like 24, maybe turning 25 before next year. And, just based off a look, Revs 2 went really hard on Donovan Parisian this season. It seems like, unfortunately, that they've kind of, not that JD has played out of kind of like favor or anything. It's just they're really excited about Donovan, so I think they're going to be putting more emphasis on him, especially in 2026. And I just don't think keeping him around here would be the greatest thing for him or the organization.
Yeah, because for sure, like you said, 24, 25, I mean, I'm sure he could catch on somewhere else if it, if if he's blocked, because Bono has I believe Bono has a contract or has an option for next year. I mean, he's not going to play if Turner's here. He didn't get a whiff of anything with Ivicic here either. But can you talk about the goalkeeping situation? Because I would have thought in 2023 for sure, and then even so last season that Weinstein would be. He was, I think at the time, he was 19 years old. I thought for sure, I was really impressed a couple times I saw him play a couple of years ago. And I thought for sure by now he would have been like knocking on the door to at least be the backup. But he's I believe he's in Estonia. So what is kind of transpire? I know no one's worried about the goalkeeping position as long as Matt Turner's here, but Matt Turner might not be here, after the World Cup.
Yeah, no, it's a really strange situation, Weinstein. Kind of like you said, going in at the end of 23, going into 24, it felt like he really had that position locked down. But then, again, kind of with the mixture of J.D. Gunn and Donovan Parisian, minutes got split between them and not so much given to Max. And ultimately, I mean, props to the organization. They kind of did right by Max by giving him the opportunity to go continue his development over in Estonia. But now it's a really big question mark coming back. He's set to come back on loan. I'm not entirely sure of his contract situation. But, if he's under contract, now you got 2, possibly 3 keepers at Revs II, which I don't know if is entirely the greatest use of resources down there.
No, probably not. I think it's a pretty safe assumption that would not be ideal. What do you think about Parisian? I mean, I can't remember. I don't know how old he is off the top of my head. But is he? I'd assume he's younger than Gunn. What was his season like, and how far away do you think he might be?
He really impressed me for being, a super draft pick. Coming right out of college from San Diego into MLS and MLS Next Pro. That's always got to be a hard transition for anybody. But he was able to kind of stick in with it. Like I said, him and Gunn were really splitting minutes towards the beginning of the year, but was able to kind of take the reins towards the end and kind of try to make the most of it. He's still very young. I think 19, 20. He's going to need a couple more seasons of development. There's times where he played really well, but then again, I'll use the playoff example. That one goal he gave up, it was right through the 5-hole from close range. You'd like to see a little bit better there, but, again, he's so young. He's only got way more to go in developing, and hopefully Revs II will be able to help that over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they really believe in him strongly, right, then I think they need to make sure, right, that they clear that path out. And, because again, I felt like with Weinstein, it's like all of a sudden he was splitting time, and it's like, well, look, if you believe in a younger goalkeeper, I think you've really got to flush that all out, right? You've got to give him, a couple thousand minutes in goal week in and week out, and really see, what happens and see how much he can develop. So I think that'll be that'll be interesting to watch next season. The goalkeeping situation, because again, it might not be that long until if Turner gets an opportunity to go, back to Europe. If he takes it and he's out of here, if Bono is looking a little shaky, which he certainly did, his 2 Open Cup appearances this year, all of a sudden, people might not be too worried about the Revs II goalkeeper, but that could become a big issue for the first team, not in not too long. Is there anyone from, any players from the academy that maybe made some appearances towards the end of the season, or were like here and there, or just that you're aware of any academy players that we would expect to see a lot more of with Revs II in 2026?
Well, yeah, he got a good run in 2025, but, Javon Basendin has been a really standout prospect for New England this season. Kind of made a couple appearances last year at the end of the year, but came in and made 22 in 2025, which is, kind of a lot to see from a 18-year-old prospect. And somebody, I think he's committed to Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see what happens with him in terms of Revs II. But, hopefully for the organization's sake, he's someone that can stick around for the long run.
Yeah. So is he not committed long term to Revs II yet?
So I have to look it up exactly. I don't know if he verbally committed or if he's actually full on committed to Indiana, but Essentially that's kind of some of the issues that they're running into is some of these kids are making pairs as Revs II, which they're doing really good at, but then they'll end up committing to college, which is good for them in the personal long run, but it's kind of makes things a little bit difficult for the organization in the short run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I know when we talked to Noel Buck's dad, he said that they definitely they put a lot of thought into which direction they were gonna which direction they were gonna go. Because again, yeah, like you said, I mean, it's a great opportunity to go to college, but it's also a great opportunity to go pro at 17, 18 years old as well. But was there anybody else that maybe just made a couple bench appearances for Revs II that are still on the younger side, still under the age of 18, that we might hope to see a little bit more from next year.
Definitely, the biggest one in my opinion has to be Makai Wells. He's a 16-year-old midfielder, former Barca residency academy prospect. Around this time last year, he was actually invited to La Masia for a training camp, which not many young prospects get an opportunity like that. So to have someone like that within your organization is absolutely critical. He only made 2 appearances, clocking 16 minutes in 2025, and he already has a youth. Wow, I'm blanking here. Already has international experience with the United States youth level. So, he's definitely someone I think is definitely going to get a big bump in minutes in 2026. And then another one, too, is Grant Emery. He's a 17-year-old winger. 9 career appearances with Revs II in the last 2 years, and he already has international experience with Lithuania at the youth level. So those are 2 guys I think are really going to have a extended presence in 2026.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think this is what the stuff that people get really excited about is we obviously had such a really, really strong run where, Noel Buck comes through, Esmer Baraktevich comes through, Jack Paniutu, I personally am really hoping to see him get his opportunity next year. But he's, look, he's at least having a great time down in Hartford for sure. So I think people are always kind of like, okay, so who's the next guy that's going to come through? Obviously, look, it's not always. You're not going to get an Esmir every other year, for sure. But I do think it is really exciting to kind of keep an eye on, who might be coming through. Now, these 2 guys you just talked about here, how do they come to be in the Revs Academy? Are they local kids, like Buck, or is it more like Esmir, where they came to the Revs Academy from farther away? Like I know, like Dario McIntosh, he's not originally from around here either.
No, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Grant Emery is from Massachusetts. I'll have to double check that in a second, but I know for a fact Makai Wells is from out of state and kind of from far distance. So, again, it kind of attests to the Revs' ability to recruit these type of guys who aren't originally from the area. That you're able to kind of sell them on this idea of coming in and kind of getting the experience you need to help your professional career.
Yeah, because right, we've seen these guys come through and get their chance with the Revs. We also saw, a player that seemed like maybe he was blocked. I can't think of his name off the top of my head now. Made his way up to Montreal, and turns out looks like he's a bit of a good player up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So is there anybody? Is there anyone else that? Let me ask you this: is there anyone else that came through Revs II that is no longer with the organization in any capacity that you thought they should have stuck around, should have gotten an opportunity with the Revs, or came in, did a really good job, you thought for sure these guys are going to make, like for me it would be like to a lesser extent now these had a full season, but like Patrick Leal, I thought for sure should have gotten an opportunity with or more of an opportunity with the first team. But is there anyone this year, last year, 2-3 years ago that you were really disappointed to see them kind of shuffle along?
Yeah, Jordan Adebayo-Smith has got to be on top of my list there. He came in for one season with Revs II, bagged 12 goals and 3 assists in his time in his one season. And then he was initially brought back, but again, kind of like Ultra Escobar, dealt off to Minnesota for $125,000. And it's just, kind of you talked about earlier, kind of, the first team having these struggles at forward and kind of, keeping that type of line healthy, how those type of prospects would have helped you in the long run.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I forgot about Jordan Adebayo-Smith, but for sure, right? Because that was also last year, right? They weren't scoring a lot of goals. Bobby Wood was struggling for fitness basically. For the entire season, Veroni was Veroni. And there was a lot of, there's a lot of talk well, for, they they should have had somebody else around somewhere, and they. They did, and he ends up going off to Minnesota, and then, like you said, Olga Escobar. I think you're remembering his name. I saw him play a couple times up in Montreal, and it's like, well, he looked pretty good. Not playing on a great team, but like the teams they were playing against were all better than Montreal, really. But he looked pretty good. So I think when those things kind of pass, it's kind of you kind of scratch your head and say, well, why didn't these guys, why didn't they get a chance with the Revolution? But so hopefully, hey, look, new coach next year. We can all hope that things will improve on many fronts. Until reality, until reality strikes. Now, speaking of that, the other thing I wanted to touch on is, the experience at Gillette Stadium. I would gather. I mean, you've been there probably more than anyone. Do you ultimately feel like they need to try and figure something else out with this team, or is it? Look, this is what it is. It's the second team. They play in an empty stadium. It's just part of the process, and this is just fine how it is.
It would be really nice to see them, kind of get, whether it be at Gillette or somewhere else, it would be really nice to see them get a bump in attendance-wise, because, especially with the playoff game, there was a bigger attendance, and, you could tell afterwards, even despite the loss, everyone was so grateful to have everyone in there, but, it's a really tough question. I think there are some pros to Gillette, these younger players coming in, they kind of, get the experience of playing on Gillette turf, kind of get a sense of the dimensions and all that type of stuff, which can be really beneficial to them and kind of, making that leap. But honestly, in every other department, it's kind of, a con, It's definitely has to be tough playing in front of empty stands every week and kind of, not really getting that presence out there.
Yeah, no, is that pretty much the standard wherever, whenever they go? I mean, when I tune into an away game, there's not really anybody at most of unless they're playing one of the independent teams. But I think this year I saw them play, in Philadelphia, nobody there. Columbus Crew 2, nobody there. Like, is this just kind of most of these teams? This is how they operate.
Honestly, it's kind of shocking because, St. Louis out in the West that we don't play, obviously, because of conferencing issues and all that. I'll casually look on Twitter and X and all that here and there, and they'll get like 2,000 people a game, which is kind of, surprising to see, because considering everywhere else is kind of, that kind of empty stadium vibe. But, I kind of do wish that all these kind of markets could get that type of presence for these younger guys.
Yeah, and I mean, they tried something last year, right? They tried to play those games up in New Hampshire. I went to one of the games up there. I mean, I don't feel like they really nailed. If you're going to try this somewhere else, I don't know that like the backside of a college campus with you're even further away from the field than you would be at Gillette, because there's a track around the whole thing. So I mean, you think that they might explore something like that again in the future, and maybe try and pick a better location?
I think it could be a benefit to them, but the big question is kind of, where is that for them now? Rhode Island, they got Rhode Island SCs kind of popping off, kind of taking over the footnotes there. Vermont Green and the Vermont kind of Mounts are kind of doing the same thing. And especially with Portland, Portland's done a really good job to grab that main market. And it's just, where do you really go from here if you want to expand out? I don't really see there being much option for them to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the issue. I always just wonder if they tried, maybe somewhere in somewhere around Worcester, if they maybe tried somewhere closer to Boston, I don't know. I even BC's soccer stadium. It's very small, but you can sit really close to the field. It's like it's not a bad venue for 1,500 people or so to watch a game. But it would be interesting to see if they try and if they try and figure something out there. Because I'd imagine, like, for you, right, like, you hear all the, we have all the, the guys that cover, Portland, 6,000 people every single game. Rhode Island's drawing, 7,000-8,000 people. Hartford's got themselves turned around. They're drawing 4,000 or 5,000 people, right? And so then you've got Revs II going out and playing in front of, 100 people and you, right? So,
100 if we're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, do you feel like they've kind of maybe, missed out a little bit here?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think part of it too is it's a tough ask for fans, especially like ones farther away from Gillette Stadium. You're going to the first team on a Saturday night and you're trekking all those miles to the first team game. I don't know how many people would want to get up the next day and do the exact same thing. And plus too, sometimes they're in the middle of the weekday. There's like an 11 o'clock game at one point this year in the summer. And it's just like the scheduling just kind of, really complicates things for them.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I hadn't thought of that, right? Like, I do occasionally say, like, why are they playing at, some 8 o'clock on a Sunday night or like 5 o'clock on a Thursday? And yeah, I definitely think that has to be a factor anyway. Whereas with the USL teams, I mean, pretty much everybody plays on Saturday night. You can have nights where Portland, the Revs, Rhode Island, Hartford, everyone's playing on Saturday night, which is obviously when people want to go. It's the most convenient time to go to a game. Yeah. It's definitely an interesting thing for them to kind of try and sort out. But look, I mean, like I said, you go to the games. What is your favorite part of that? Like, if you're trying to look, if you're a season ticket holder for the Revolution, you do get a handful of, you can get, I think it's 3 games a year. So if you and somebody else have season tickets, you can get, what is your favorite aspect of going down and watching these guys play? Because I mean, like I said, I mean, you've got to be the only person that doesn't work for the organization that has been at like every single game for the last 2 years. So what is it that keeps you going back to these games?
I think it's a connection. Again, it's not many people there. And again, kind of like what I said at the playoff game, these guys really appreciate having people out there. And again, the more people there, the merrier. But unfortunately, like we said, there's max like 100, 150 people there. But, again, you're able to sit close. The 3 sections they have there, you can get pretty close to the field, which is right by where they walk in and walk out. So you kind of get to form those connections with those guys, which, again, could be very crucial for their development.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and again, particularly the last 2 years, I appreciate the style of play, the speed of play, when what we've had to watch with the first team has been, well, unwatchable for long stretches. Yeah, for sure. But I do think it's a pretty good time. It's certainly a lot less crowded, easy to get in, easy to get out. But yeah, I think hopefully what we'll see is, a pipeline that continues where you start to see these guys that you're talking about and you're covering, they start to show up and and have success with the first team. I mean, is there any team that comes to mind that you think gets the most out of their second team?
I kind of brought it up a little bit earlier. I think Columbus Crew has really nailed this kind of, pipeline. You had guys like Jason Russell-Bro, who has kind of been a pretty prominent figure within Columbus over the last couple of years. Plus, got guys like Noah Fuson, who's kind of done really good with Rhode Island and kind of been able to produce a bunch of talent like that to help, whether or not be in Columbus or not. They're able to kind of develop these really talented soccer players to help them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the fun part of it too, right? Like we see, Patrick Leal is playing in Las Vegas now. Ryan Spalding is playing for Sacramento Republic. Damian Rivera is down with Phoenix Rising.
Yep.
Phoenix, yeah. So even if they don't work out here, it is then, it is kind of enjoyable to kind of follow along and see how they do, where they move on to, wherever they move on to. But Josh, look, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and just kind of get everybody up to speed, on Revs II. Myself included. It's just been such a rough 2 years that there was times where as long as the bad man was here, it's like, I really can't really dig into Revs II because I just kind of felt like, these guys they're probably not going to get an opportunity to come through. We've got Luis Diaz instead, and we've got the we've got the life ghost of some of these other guys. So yeah, I definitely appreciate you coming on. It's a fun team to watch. And hopefully, again, we'll see better days ahead for the first team next year, and hopefully Revs II can follow on and have a second consecutive playoff appearance. Aside from the Blazing Musket, where can people follow you on social media to keep up with Revs II? And what does the off season look like for these guys? How does this whole thing? Does it all come together at the last minute? Like what is this like? Trying to keep an eye on who's going to be with the team next year.
Yeah, so firstly, it's especially at a time like this, it's a little bit difficult. We really don't know the future of Richie Williams, whether he'll be back with the organization or not. He's kind of talked about, wanting to, further his career, and whether that be here in New England or elsewhere. So, he's definitely going to be one to watch. And then kind of, talk about the first team head coaching search. I think a lot of it will depend on, that type of, like, what they want out of the second team and kind of what they're looking for. But, yeah, no, so... let me check here. There's a couple players that are going to be under contract, especially like the first team guys like Donovan and DeMario and Eric Klein and Alan Allworth, who are obviously going to be here with the first team. But then, Cristiano Oliveira last year signed a quote-unquote multi-year deal heading into 2025, so he'll be a name that's coming back. Who else? There's a couple guys, Chris Mbaye-Assam and... Oh, yeah. Chris Mbaye-Assam, he's someone that's definitely has a contract year, or a guaranteed contract for next year. And there's also a handful of guys that are on options, so really interesting to see what kind of route they go with in terms of building out this roster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's, again, like it is kind of tricky. Like these guys are going to stay, they're going to go, and then there's so much to be decided in terms of the head coach potentially for both teams, really. So yeah. All right. So as we go into the winter, trying to keep up with all this stuff, obviously, the Blazing Musket has the best coverage of Revs II anywhere on Earth. And where can people keep up with you on social media so they can get all the latest as all this stuff develops?
Yeah, so pretty much anywhere it's going to be Josh Nye 8798 on X, Blue Sky, trying to get more involved on there. Also, Twitter, Instagram too. I obviously spent the last half season photographing Revs II games, trying to dip my pen into that. So if you want to go look at frames from that, there's all up on there.
Awesome. All right. Well, Josh, thanks again. Once we know what this team is going to look like next year, once we know who the coach is going to be, we'll absolutely have you come on and do a season preview, so we know who to watch out for and what to look out for next year.
Look forward to it.